Check, check, check. 1, 2. You should be able to hear me. Just let me know if you can. Actually, let's search for that. No. Hit search. Go to assets. Okay. Search under assets. Okay, cool. Okay, excellent. Okay, today I've sent you the link to this file earlier. You can see it. It's from the multitrack library. This is a really, really interesting drum recording because it's live, so there's a bit of bleed from other instruments into it. Also, it's a showcase of the Telefunken microphones recorded at Telefunken Studios. So they've used a lot of different really cool microphones, and they've used multiple different overhead miking techniques on the same drum performance. That means you can hear how it would be to mix different miking techniques for the same song, for the overheads especially. And since that is kind of traditionally with drums, that's the most important aspect of the drum recording, it's great that you have 3 different options here for that. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly jump into this. Before I do, though, I am using a mixing template. Okay, I just want to highlight this because this is my mixing template that I've created for myself. These are never complete. There's always stuff to do. So you can see on the left, I have a lot of different tracks, which when I load up the template, it just loads up like this. So I'm just going to show you the template first really quickly. I won't bore you with this. This is what the template looks like when I load it up. I have everything I need ready to go. I have my VCAs, my groups, my subgroups, and all that stuff for all the different instruments that I might be mixing that particular day. This is for like a traditional band kind of thing. So I don't need to muck about setting all this up. I don't need to waste time setting up my mix groups, my drum groups, and all that stuff. I have everything to go right here. And if I need more tracks, I can just duplicate this stuff and it's good to go. Especially with things like parallel processing and all that stuff, it's already set up. So I just need to send, and then I have my parallel processing chain set up over here. It's good to set up a template even if you don't know exactly what your template is going to be, because every time I open this up, I make some small changes to it, and over months and years, it improves and it gets really robust, and it just makes your life a lot easier. So if you're doing anything that takes more than like 20 minutes for you to do during your process, um, uh, don't hesitate to save it as a template. Even if it doesn't work for you the next time you open it up, you will be able to make tweaks to it and get it to a point where it really, really works for you. You just drag tracks in. So I opened this template up and I just dragged all these tracks in for my drums. I've renamed the channels to whatever I needed to rename them to. The icons are already there because they are basically from the template. So all the icons are already there for me, which is very handy. And what I do is I just select all the other tracks and I hide them. So I use my track manager on my left, and all these other tracks are still here in the template, but they are basically hidden. So if you go down, they're all there, but I've just hidden them. So you use the track manager, hide everything you don't need, and just work on the stuff that you do. Super handy. And just drag and drop. Use the Media Explorer. Just drag and drop stuff in, and you're good to go. Okay, so that's out of the way. I'm just gonna get started with the class. Let me just check and see if this thing is selected. Okay, cool. Can you hear reverb? Should be coming through. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to start off with this approach to this track with an approach that I would normally use if I were to mix this track in general. So first, but just to like give you an idea of where this could go, I'm going to just drag and play the finished mix. This is not a mix I've done. This is the mix that Mike Senior did for this track. Okay, so these are the drums raw as they are. Right? They sound pretty good. Fantastic recording. Nothing to really complain about there. This is the finished mix. You make it hard, I wanna stop and stare. Really punchy, fantastic sounding mix, a bit overcompressed for my taste, a bit too distorted for my taste. But then again, Mike does all these mixes, I think, in like a day or something. He doesn't really spend more than that on these. So you can go from something like this to something like that with just like the right mixing techniques and things like that. So when you hear, but you know, the thing is, the idea isn't to be like, oh, how can I make this sound amazing? It's how do you identify the potential of a mix, right? So if I listen to this, I'm like, oh, okay, this sounds okay, but in my head, I have no idea that this can be the end result, right? I have no clue that I can bring this to this point. Right, and that's a really nice punchy sounding mix. It sounds live. This whole thing was recorded live. The band was recorded live in a studio. So how do you get there? So initially you start off by identifying the quality of the recording, and by that you are looking at two things with a drum recording. One is how good do all the individual things sound. By how good, this can be subjective. So what you're really looking for is how close to capturing the real instrument have we reached with the recording process. So with a kick drum, especially if you're aware of the kind of kick drum that was used, or how the kick drum was tuned and all that stuff, you can listen to it and you can say, okay, if I were to listen to this in a room, is this how it would have translated? Is this how it would have sounded? And have the mics captured that? That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is everything relatively in phase? Okay, with a multi-mic recording, you can never get everything to be perfectly in phase. That's physically impossible. But in phase enough, or in phase in a way that it sounds full and pleasing to you. And to be more scientific about it, because again, if you get too subjective, you tend to get lost in the weeds. To be a little bit more scientific about it, in phase to a point where the important frequencies for a drum kit are not being cancelled out by other mics. For example, for a snare drum, the frequencies that are important for the snare is between 100 and 250 hertz, depending on the tuning of the snare. It can vary. So you don't want any cancellation to be happening over there, because that's where the thump of the snare is, the fatness, the body of the snare, the warmth, all that stuff comes from that range. So when you mix the snare and the overheads, you don't want those frequencies to cancel out, right? That's really important, because if there is cancellation happening there, then you're losing very important frequencies in the snare drum. Other places you don't want to have phasing artifacts is in the upper 4K, 3K range of the snare, where a lot of the snap, the attack, and the sizzle of the snare is. It's very rare that you'll have cancellation here, but you might have phasing artifacts. What are they? They're like, it sounds like a phaser, right? Like a guitar phaser. This can happen if the overhead mic is moving up and down during the recording. So let's say the mic is not on a solid stand, and the base of the let's say the drum kit is elevated on some kind of platform. That platform is moving, and as a result the overhead mics are also moving about an inch or two up and down along with the drums. Then you're gonna get these kind of weird phasing artifacts and stuff like that. They're very rare in the high frequencies, but it could happen. So you're listening for these things. With the kick drum, it would be even lower, 50, 60 hertz, and so on. And the same concept you'll be applying to toms and things like that. You listen to it. Are the important frequencies being cancelled out by the overheads or any other mics that are picking up the same instrument? If not, you're good to go. Now, these are sort of uh, very clinical cases where you're looking at things and you're looking at it from a very clinical perspective. You can also use phase cancellation to your advantage. Let's say a snare drum is too bottom heavy, right? It's too heavy in the mid range, in the low end, and there's some cancellation happening with the overheads. That you can use that to negate some of that. You may not want to fix that. Those are creative. That's where you're getting into sort of creative territory, and that's something that will come only with time and experience. But to start with, good rule of thumb is what's important for this drum kit, what's important for this instrument is that being cancelled out by phase. So this is a super important thing to look at. The other thing to look at is um, the general levels of everything, because this by itself is not a drum mix. The overheads by itself is not a drum mix. It's everything coming together and how you've leveled everything out. So that's, again, take a lot of time just balancing the levels of things to a point where you're happy with the way it sounds, and then you can go and start like ripping things apart from within. So I'm just gonna jump right into this. I've not mixed this. I've not done any pre-mixing. I've not done anything like what you're seeing right now is just basically me having loaded the tracks into my template. That's it. I've not touched anything. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and start adjusting the levels, the input levels of things to get everything to a point where I have a lot of headroom in each of these tracks. Why do I do this? Again, like I said, because I like having headroom in my tracks, and it's nice to know that everything is sort of peaking at the same place. You don't have to do this process at all, because reducing the volume on your fader is the same as reducing your volume here. But this is going to be post effects. This is going to be pre effects. You don't have to do it on your items either. You can just use a trim plugin and do it over there. I like to do it on my items. You can choose to do this however you want, or you can choose to not do this step altogether. It is really up to you. Okay, so but anyway, since we're doing it, okay, gain knobs to the item. So just go to your options, go to preferences, go to find, hit knob, find, and you'll see this media item buttons thing show up. Just tick volume knob. That's it. So if I untick that, apply, you'll notice that all my volume knobs are gone. If I tick it and hit apply, all my volume knobs are back. That is it. Very, very simple. Usually, if there's anything that you can't find or you can't figure out how to do, try to use the finder over here, because there are a lot of options. Just try to use the finder, type in the word that you're kind of looking for, and most of the time you will find it here. Okay, so I'm just going to start leveling this out. Not the most fun process, but again, important. Okay, that's about 12 dB. So this will all be roughly around the same. Again, I don't get too anal about this. I'm just like, okay, I just want to be roughly in the ballpark. I don't really care too much about, oh, is it exactly 18 minus 18? No, it doesn't matter. And this is again a an approach that I have developed from mixing live. In live sound, I'd be sort of adjusting the gains at this point on my mixer input. And again, you don't have time to sit and figure out if you're maxing out at minus 18 over the course of a track or whatever. So I don't really care too much. I just get it kind of in the ballpark using my peak meters, and that's the end of that. And also, it helps to go to the loudest sections. So these seem to be the loudest peaks. So I'll just go there, take that down until those peaks are around minus 18. And again, good to go. Toms, you want to go to place. But anyway, so we've got drums. Next thing I want to do is I want to sort of demo everything, right? I want to listen to everything individually, see what it sounds like, etc. So maybe the first things you'd want to do is just pan all your overheads out. So there are 3 sets of overheads, right? So these two are XY overheads. If you don't know what XY overheads are, it's basically a miking technique where you take 2 pencil condensers and you sort of position them like this. Okay, you can see these images. Not this. Basically, it kind of forms an X. And this is sort of held over the drums. And yeah, you can use it over the drums. You can use it over any instrument, basically. It's a stereo miking technique. You also see these on some of those Zoom recorders. They sort of come pre-built like this. This is very handy because you get a stereo image that isn't super wide but is very phase coherent with the other mic, because they're so close to each other in terms of where they're receiving the sound. You get an extremely good phase coherent stereo image. It's much narrower than a spaced pair. Like, for example, traditionally you'll see something like that over the drum kit, but on 2 different stands. But they're so far apart from each other that they're getting the signal at very different times from, say, the snare. And aligning this and making it work is a lot harder. XY is great if you're recording a live band, especially because you're also getting sound reaching from amps and things like that. And if that stuff is being mixed in with the signal sources from the amps, you get a lot more phase coherence between these 2 mics. It's a fantastic technique. It's one of my favorite miking techniques because it's so easy to use, and it's impossible to screw up XY. And it does sound really nice and natural in terms of the stereo image. So that's the first overhead position. So let's listen to that. Let's make that a bit louder. As you can see from the correlation meter, it's pretty wide, but it's not too nice. Okay, that's XY. Then let's take a listen to our first split pair. These this naming convention I've used here, it's nothing special. It's just the model of the microphone used. So it's some Telefunken model. It's there on the item names as well. So ELAM 260, whatever, and going through a BAE preamp, a 1073. So I've just used that naming convention here as well. This is the Copperhead 29 from Telefunken. So let's take a listen to that. Much wider. You'll see that in the correlation as well. Also, very different frequency spectrum over there. And let's go to the last split pair. This is also a split pair around the same position as this. So in the link I've sent you, there are pictures and notes as well that you can find for these mic positions, and some documentation about the mics and how it was recorded and all of that stuff. So do check it out. That stuff is really handy when you're mixing. Another split pair, which is mono because I haven't panned it out. Let's pan it out. That's really nice. Okay, so that's basically split XY, and we have two splits, two different mics, and one XY. So this is recorded like this, not because you're supposed to use all the overheads. It's because you have an option to either use this or use that, which is amazing. It's like really, really handy that they've managed to do so much with their miking techniques and give you so many options for the mix. It is very unusual, and it's going to be kind of impossible to use all of these because, well, it's just you're not going to be able to get that phase coherence. Okay. Let's also listen to the kick drum. There are 3 kick drum. No, you can't physically use all of them because if you get the snare in phase with, say, the XY, it's not going to be in phase with the overhead, with the split pair. It's just because they're all in different positions, you can only get phase coherence between one pair of mics. So I don't know yet. I haven't checked out the thing, but in my but what I'm going to assume is that I can get phase coherence between the split pairs, both the split pairs, so I could maybe use both of them, or I can or not. I don't know. But if I could use a combination of overhead mics, could be both the split pairs, but definitely not the XY and the splits because they're physically in different places. Okay. Also, just check out the room mic. I love room mics. Let's see what this room sounds like. This is a mono room mic. Looks like it wasn't too far away from the drum kit. Okay, just hang on a second, man. My iPad died, so I just need to get the charger for it because I can't read the chat anymore. Just give me a second. Be right back. Check. Okay, we're back. Cool. So, room mic sounds like it's been recorded pretty close to the drum kit. Um, Again, no surprise there because this is a live recording. You wouldn't want to place the room mic too far away because then you'll get a lot more of, say, guitars and vocals and bass and keys and all that stuff instead of mostly drums. So you don't hear a very big sounding room. That's most likely because the room mic is pretty close to the drum kit. But what's important here is it balanced? Let's just listen to a mic, listen to how balanced it is. The kick and the snare are the loudest in this mic. The hi-hat is exactly where you'd want it. Let's go to a crash. Nice and loud, but not too loud. Even the toms are superbly balanced. So even though this is one mic, you have a fantastically balanced recording, which is very important when you're, and also like take this away if you're miking anything, you're miking a drum kit especially, and you're just using one mic. Make sure everything is balanced. You place that mic in a place where you hear the difference in volumes between stuff very much like the drummer is playing them. And if something is too loud in the room, then you need to change what's happening at the source. You really can't fix that at the mic. So if, let's say, the cymbals are way too loud, either the drummer's playing them too loud compared to the rest of the drum kit, or they're too bright and sizzly, or your room is just reflecting too many high frequencies. It's probably going to be something like that. But if you're hearing a nice balanced kit from your drummer, you should be able to capture that with just one mic. And the reason that's important and the reason that's good is because you can then do this with that. You can crush the crap out of it and get a really nice sounding compressed room sound. And you blend that in with the rest of your drum kit, you're gonna have like a really nice beefy sounding kit. That's great. Because you want to be able to bring up all the air from the room mic without certain things getting too loud, which is why that balance is super important. Okay, so that's that. We also have a ride mic here, which, as the name suggests, is a ride mic. Nothing to write home about over there. We can look at the kick drums. We've got 3 kick drum mics. This first one is an M80. The second one is also an M80. And the third one is a U47. So these two are basically kind of dynamic mics from Telefunken. And this one is a condenser, right? So I'm guessing... Yeah, one is sort of closer to the beta. Got more high end on that. This one is further away, probably at the sound hole. And this one, yeah, is outside the drum kit, outside the kick drum, away from the sound hole. Because you would never put a U47 against the sound hole of a kick drum, because then it will break from the air pushing up against it. And these are very expensive mics. So that's the combination of kicks. We've got 3 One is basically giving you a nice full-bodied sound of the kick drum, capturing everything, and we've got two mics which are giving you a sound closer to the beater and a sound further away from the beater, a little bit more bottom end and mid range. So I'd look at this as, I'm using this information, right? So this I would be as M80 in. Okay, and again, I could be wrong about this. It could be that they're all in the same spot. Who knows? M80 out. They're just different mics giving me different sounds. But this is how I am visualizing the sound of these mics so that I can use them accordingly in the mix. So U47 full, right? So if I were to use only one of these mics to represent the kick drum, it would be this, right? I would just use this because it's a nice full-bodied sound. It's got everything. It's got the lows, it's got the highs. And it's a U47, so you can crank the top end on it, and it sounds really pleasing because it's a very, very high-end, extremely good mic. And you can tell it's outside the kick drum because you hear a lot of the rest of the drum kit. Nice. Okay, cool. I'm not gonna name that full because I'm not sure if I'll use the full range of that. Maybe I'll just use the low end. I don't know. Let's see. Okay. So there's that. Then we can take a listen to the snare. And again, take time with this process. The more you know about your sources, the more informed your decisions can be. So this is the snare top, probably an M80 again. Beautifully recorded, zero bleed. Of course, the hi-hat is not playing right now. Look at that. Sounds like it's already gated. Fantastic. Probably is going through some kind of processing at the preamp stage, but I don't know. Bottom. Superb. Again, so clean, no bleed. Hi-hats. Fantastic. Nice, smooth, not too bright, not too in your face. I'm getting a bit of cymbal bleed over there, but that's again very normal, not a problem. And then finally, let's look at the toms. The instrument I hate the most in the world, and no drummer should use toms for anything, but unfortunately they do, so I need to listen to them. Let's check these out. There we go. Nice. This one sounds lower than the other one. Oh yeah, because that's Tom 2 and this is Tom 1. I'm using the wrong files. Yep, there we go. Okay. There we go. That's nice. Pretty high tune tom. Again, not a lot of bleed. Very clean. And even the bleed is clean. Okay, that's a concept I haven't talked to you about. If you listen to something and there's bleed in it, like for example, this tom. This is the bleed in the tom mic of the rest of the drum kit. Listen to the bleed. Don't immediately start fighting it. Okay, listen to it. And if it sounds clean, what do you mean by does it sound pleasing? Does it sound, like it doesn't have any weird resonances or anything like that? Like sometimes bleed can sound like this. Let's put a band pass on it. Depending on where the mic is positioned, how weird the mic is, how weird the room is, you can have weird artifacts like this. You can have bleed that sounds like that. Like these weird filters that are happening naturally because of the way the air is moving into the and hitting the mic's the mic's diaphragm. Maybe it's bouncing off of things in the room. Maybe it's I don't know. Maybe it's bouncing off the shell of the drum kit. Whatever, it could be anything. Any number of things that are causing the bleed to sound really weird. You could have bleed that sounds like this. Look for resonances. If the bleed sounds like this instead, This is clean bleed, where you have a balanced recording of the rest of the drum kit in a mic that's capturing something else entirely. So clean bleed is really good because you can add that to your mix, right? You don't need to remove this unless it's causing some very specific issue, because that adds glue to your drum kit. It sort of gels everything together. It gives it some life, some character. It makes it feel much more natural and fun to listen to because it gives you character. So don't worry if you have bleed. Bleed is not a bad thing. If it's clean, bleed is your friend. Um, so always think about what you're doing before you do it. Most engineers who are sort of like, just getting to grips with drum mixing, first thing they'll do is like, okay, this is the tom, I don't need this shit, let's just delete everything else. And usually they have that. I do that too, but only in cases where the bleed sounds like shit. If the bleed sounds nice, I'm going to leave it in, I'm going to blend it in there. And also think about the ratio of level between the toms and the noise floor, right? The noise floor in this case is the bleed. So is the bleed so loud that if I turn this up for my toms to be at a level where I want them to be, the bleed is going to be way too loud in the mix? In that case, you might want to maybe use an expander to reduce the bleed. It sounds nice, but you want to just expand that. So an expander would be something that, unfortunately, Reaper doesn't have any good expander plugins. So I'm going to show you this with an example. It would be something like this. You take the bleed and you sort of reduce it by about 8 dB, basically like a noise gate, but the floor of the noise gate is in infinity. The floor of the noise gate is about 8 dB. So the noise gate opens, but when it closes, it just reduces everything by 8 dB. That's all an expander does. That's the only difference, honestly. You can achieve something similar with regate, but it's kind of shit, so I wouldn't bother. You can do this instead. So you like the bleed, you want it in, but it's a bit too loud, just do that. Okay, this is what will make you stand out. This is what will make your work stand out when you're mixing for other people or you're mixing for yourself, you're working on your own stuff, is how creative and interesting can you make your recording sound, right? Anybody can clean this stuff up and make it sound super polished and super clean, but doing things that give it character and make it feel different and feel unique, that's the kind of stuff that really catches people's ears. How creative can you be? So anyway, that's out of the way. Now let's start checking for phase. We've taken a look at all the mics. We like what we're hearing. There are no issues with any of these mics. Fantastically recorded by some genius recording engineers. Awesome. Great place to start. Next, we want to look at phase, right? So let's bring up our close mics, snare. Okay, snare top, snare bottom. Usually these things are always out of phase with each other because the snare top, when the top part of the snare is hit, the head is becoming like a concave structure. And at the same time, it's pushing air downwards to the bottom head, and the bottom head is becoming a convex structure, right? So it's pushing the bottom head is pushing out while the top head is pushing in, and the opposite is happening, on the other end when it's coming back up. So those waves are always going to be opposite by default. There is no way a snare top and snare bottom is going to be in phase because the heads are sort of displacing air in opposite waveforms by the physical nature of a drum. So you're always going to have to flip the polarity of one of these mics to bring them in phase. Now, in this case, since this was obviously recorded by some genius recording engineers, they might have already done it at the mixing desk. And this is usually what I like to do when I'm tracking, is on my mixing desk, if I'm recording a band, I just try to get everything in phase at the recording phase itself so that the mix engineer doesn't have to worry about this stuff. So all you need to do is just take a look at this. Okay, you can just take a look at it and you can see that yes, the timing is obviously different because the mics are going to be at slightly different distances from their respective heads. But when this guy goes up, this guy goes up. Okay, you can just zoom into that. This is going up, this is going up. This is in phase. That's test number 1. Test number 2 is just listen to it, okay? We'll just listen to one snare hit, put that on loop. Okay, invert polarity, and boom, it's gone. Bring it back, and our snare is back, okay? If you're not hearing that, I'm going to pump that up again, listen to it. In phase, out of phase. Okay, this is a very, very, very evident, very obvious phase cancellation thing that's happening right now. If you're unable to hear it, you should definitely switch your listening environment because this is super obvious. You should be able to hear this even on like Apple earpods or earphones or whatever. So again, I'm going to wait until you message in chat and let me know you can hear this. Out of phase, in phase. Yeah, okay, fantastic. So again, these are those things where it's not about training or ears or whatever. You just need a decent pair of headphones and you can hear differences like this. Okay, next is so our snare is in phase. Next is the kick drum, right? So we have 3 different kick drums, and phase is usually, what are you checking for? You're checking for how many mics have recorded one instrument. In this case, the kick drum has been picked up by 3 different mics. Are all those mics in phase, right? That's it. That's all you're checking for. That is the approach, and the idea is simple. The execution, however, can vary depending on your situation. So again, same thing. Go ahead. From the looks of it, they're all in phase. With Reaper, of course, it also adds the waveforms up here in your group, which is fucking amazing. I cannot tell you how useful this is. My drums are in phase. I can visually look at them and tell that they're in phase. So just to show you what they'd look like if they were out of phase, I'm going to go to item settings, switch polarity on one of these guys. Invert phase, right? So that's what you'll see if it's out of phase. Okay, that's what you'll see visually. I'm using only two mics because I want to keep this simple. That's what you'll see. You'll see as one is dipping, one wave will be rising. So we'll go back, go to item settings, put phase back to normal, and we're back to normal. Okay. Let's do an audio test because that's really important. You always want to sign off everything with an audio test. Okay. Since we're using 3 mics, we want to use one as a reference. So we want everything to be in phase with that one mic. So in this case, I'm just going to use the first one. You can use any one mic you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use this one. Let's listen to this. Okay. I'm going to bring that in. Sounds good. Invert phase. And it's gone. You can even see how much it's dipping on the peak meter. I'm going to reverse this again. Okay, that's hugely out of phase if I do that, right? Then I'm going to go to the third mic, do the same thing, mute the second one. Again, this is what we're using as a reference. So everything just needs to be in phase with that and we're good. Again, sounds good. Invert phase. Boom. It's gone. Bring it back. Okay, so all these 3 mics are in phase. That means we can use all 3 of them in our mix without worrying about causing any phase issues between the 3. So, okay, that's the easy stuff out of the way. Now we start getting into ambient mic territory and even other things as well. But we'll first finish off with the ambient mics, okay? Starting with the hi-hat. Now, why the hi-hat? The hi-hat is also picking up the snare, right? It's not like it's not picking up the snare because there is bleed of the snare in the hi-hat. So you want to listen to that, see if that's in phase as well. Because the hi-hat is the closest ambient mic technically to the snare. Okay, let's listen to that in the hi-hat alone. There's hardly any of it there, honestly. Yeah, that's fine. Again, There's hardly any difference between the two, in or out of phase. But out of phase, you can hear some artifacting going on. Let's check that out. Okay, that's with the hi-hat in phase, out of phase, in phase, out of phase. So it's like about a dB difference. It's very hard to hear, but it's definitely happening. There is some phase cancellation happening between the snare. I'm only using the top snare as reference. Again, always compare between two signal sources. Don't use three. It can get very confusing and it's unnecessary. There is some phase cancellation happening with the hi-hat when I invert the phase. So, I don't need to invert the polarity on that. It is good to go with the snare. And I'm not going to bother with this and the kick drum because anyway, it's a hi-hat. I don't need any of the low frequencies on this. So when I do mix it, I'm going to be cutting all that stuff off. So it doesn't really matter anyway. Okay. And it sounds like there's already a high-pass filter on that mic that's been done at the recording phase. So nothing to worry about. Next, let's move to the overheads, right? This is sort of make or break situation. You get this stuff in phase and you are good to go. So first things first, I'm going to just play the kick and the snare. I'm going to take a small section over here, maybe between that and that. Let's put a marker there. Let's put a marker there. Okay, loop that. Actually, I don't want a symbol on my first thing, so maybe put a marker there. Smaller loop. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, cool. So, don't need the hi-hats for this. All I'm going to do now is just bring these overheads in over what's happening here, right? So I'm going to mute the kick. Just keep the snare open, just the top snare. Okay. Now, the stereo pair overhead is one signal source for me. I'm going to... tap to transient is very simple. Just select any track you want, hit tab, and the cursor will move to the closest transient. That's it. So if I do that, say for example, right now I'm selecting the top kick drum track, which is why it's tabbing to that. You can also select the snare and it'll tab to that as well. And you just keep hitting tab, it'll just keep going to the next closest transient. You can adjust transient settings by hitting D on your keyboard. The D for delta. Set transient sensitivity, and you can change the sensitivity of this transient using the threshold control as well. Okay, D for delta, transient sensitivity, and that affects tab to transient. Okay, so snare, I'm switching to mono here because it's much easier to tell to detect phase issues in mono. So I'm going to turn this up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to bring the overheads in. So this snare sounds nice and full, right? We're only hearing the snare, and you can't have phase issues with a snare if you don't have any other signals. You need two signals for phase issues, right? Because there's nothing to cancel this out. It's only one. So this is the snare, all natural, how we're meant to hear it. Now I'm going to bring the overheads on top of that. It sounds to me like this is yeah, so these are totally out of phase with the snare. Okay, so as I bring it in, this is important to be able to hear because as I bring these in, you'll notice that this snare is getting thinner. All right, let's listen to that again. right? So to me, it sounds like it's out of phase. But you don't need to rely on your ears alone. In this case, you can also just test it. So I'm going to flip the phase on the snare, right? You see how much more of a peak I'm getting over there, and how much fuller that sounds. Unflip. Okay, so every bar I'm going to flip and unflip the phase. And I want you to type in chat if you can hear the difference and how obvious that difference is to you. How do you do this live? Every mixing channel has a phase invert switch live. So exactly as I am doing this now, it's done live. There's no difference from what I'm doing now to what you would do in a live situation, because every mixing console, every channel on a mixing console by default has a polarity invert switch. So going back to what you said earlier, more bottom end, very, very important. All right, that's a great thing to be able to. Oh, how do you loop the snare? You don't loop the snare. You just get the drummer to keep playing the snare. That's it. That's why people say, hey, play the snare. That's why you hear a drummer going tack, tack, tack on during a sound check, because the engineer is checking all the different mics to see if the snare is in phase. That's it. You just ask the drummer to play. It's much easier live because you can ask the drummer to play individual snares, individual drums, and then you can check the polarity and all that stuff. But also, this isn't so important live because polarity like the way things are EQ'd live is very different, and phase doesn't really play that big of a role with overheads and things like that. So that's a totally different scenario altogether. um, I want when you're learning this stuff, please keep in mind that some of it may carry over to live, but live is a totally different ball game altogether. And your the way you think about stuff, the way you conceptualize things in a live scenario is very different. And if you try to apply things exactly as I'm showing you live, you're gonna be in for a world of pain, because that's exactly what happened to me. And I had to like sort of not do certain things live that I do in the studio. So studio mixing and live mixing, two completely different things. Um, a lot of concepts do carry over, but the way your execution is very different. So always just think about try to think about things holistically when you're working in environments like for just to give you a quick example, since we're on the topic. For me to make a kick drum sound big and punchy in a recording, I need to use judicial EQ, some distortion, maybe a transient designer. I need to do all this stuff so that it sounds nice and punchy at a low volume, right? That's really important. And I need all the frequencies there because I can't sacrifice like 20 dB at 200 hertz on my kick drum, because on some speakers that's all that's going to come out, and you need to make that work across many different speakers. In live, you just need to make that kick drum sound good on one speaker system that's in front of you. So if it sounds good there, it doesn't matter what you've done. You can do anything. There are no rules. As long as it sounds good there, it works, because it doesn't need to sound good tomorrow. That mix doesn't need to sound good tomorrow in somebody else's speaker system. Having said that, though, you have like hundreds of watts of power like thousands of watts of power in these big speakers being pumped out at the audience. So you don't need distortion, you don't need transient designers, you don't need anything. You just turn the volume of the kick drum up, right? You turn it up to a place where it's powerful and punchy and hitting you in the face, and you have sound pressure level on your side when you're mixing live. Whereas in a studio, you need to fake that stuff using smoke and mirrors and illusions, like distortion and harmonic excitement and all that stuff, and layering and all that jazz. So that's why those two approaches are different. In one case, I can just turn the volume up. In another case, I need to fake turning the volume up. So I hope that that's something, that's some food for thought when it comes down to live and studio mixing, and why they concepts can translate, but your thought process needs to be different in both cases. Um, so let's go back to this. So you can obviously hear that. So this is in phase. When I invert the polarity on the snare. So I need to change the polarity of the snare, but we're not going to do that. Can you tell me why I'm not going to invert the polarity on the snare drum, even though it's obviously fixing the issue? What happens if I invert the polarity on the snare? I'll just play this in the meanwhile as background music. Okay, so your assumption is very correct. You're absolutely spot on with what you're assuming, with your sort of the way you're deducting this, but you're wrong about what will be out of phase. So if you notice, we just got these two things in phase, the snare top and the snare bottom mics, right? So these are in phase, obviously. So if I invert one of them to match the overheads, it's now going to be out of phase with the snare bottom. So I need to invert both of these to match the overheads, which is kind of a pain. I'll have to go in and invert everything one by one. So instead, it's better to just invert the overhead mics. Let's listen to this whole combination with the overheads. Yeah, I just meant what happens if I just invert the snare top. Yeah. So I'm just going to go ahead and invert this. Sounds great. Do it in mono. Without. Yeah, okay, cool. No, so in that case, you were spot on. Like, spot, exactly. Yeah, you basically, if you start inverting individual mics, you start getting things, other things start going out of phase and all that stuff. And also, um, I can't confirm this because honestly, I haven't tested it myself. But usually, with things like snares and kicks, if the bottom end is pushing out first, so this means that your speaker cone is going to push outwards first and then pull in. Okay, that's what this means. If I invert this, where's the invert? Man, why can I never find this? Yeah. So if I invert this, that means the snare is going to, the speaker is going to pull in first and then push out. I have been told that it's better to do this because it's better for your speakers over time, and it also makes the whole thing a bit punchier or something like that. I can't confirm this honestly because I've never heard the difference, but as a rule of thumb, I always try to avoid um, inverting the closed mics because it just feels better to me, honestly. But there are lots of people who invert the closed mics as well, and in some scenarios, depending on the mix you're working with, you may have to invert the closed mic. You may not have a choice. So yeah, that's uh, one of the many reasons I'm inverting the overheads right now. So let's listen to the overheads with the kick and the snare. Okay, that sounds good to me. I'm getting a little bit more bottom end out of that snare drum. Now let's check the other overheads as well. I'm going to do that again with the snare. Again, out of phase, so I'm going to invert that as well. Final overheads to check out. Also out of phase. So all overheads are out of phase with the snare. That's cool. So now we have everything in phase. Let's check the ride with the snare. I don't think there's going to be any issue here because it sounded like there was already a high pass filter on this. Honestly, I hear no difference, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. Sounds fine again without inversion. Gonna leave that as it is. You'll notice that I'm not really worrying too much about the ride and the room and all that because these don't feature so much in your mix anyway. You don't need to spend too much time worrying about these things. If they sound good to you at whatever polarity inversion they are, they're good to go. Don't worry about it. Now you might be wondering at this point, like, okay, I can invert polarity. Are there other ways to fix phase? Yes, absolutely, there are other ways to fix phase. There are many, in fact. I'm going to only cover one more, but just to let you know, I only use other methods if this does not work. And in all the years I've mixed, I have never I have maybe only once or twice needed to use a different technique, and that's only because the recording was so god awful that I had to use some other weird technique to work with the phase. So, one other thing you can do to make this work is you can nudge these overheads, right? To line up with the snare. So these are the overheads right here. That's the snare, right? So as you can see, we've got the snare over there, starting over there, and the overhead is starting there. Obviously, that's going to be the case because the overheads are starting much later than the snare mic because the overhead mics are much further away from the snare mic, right? Obvious. So you can get this in phase by aligning them together like this, and you'll also get phase coherence like that. So let's just quickly give that a listen. Right, so I'm just gonna pop the polarity off again. Now they're out of phase. And I'm just gonna align them. And now they're back in phase. Now, in most cases, this can sound a lot better when you're just comparing, the mics and the snare. But I never use this. I never ever use this. I avoid this at all costs because for me, and again, you can use this if you want. A lot of people do use this technique. But for me, it's the distance between those mics and the difference in time between when you're hearing them that makes them sound special. And that's why I have overhead mics further away from the snare. Anyway, because I want to capture the air, the room, and the time delay between those two hits. It adds character, it adds depth to the mix. It adds a lot of things that I lose if I change that time difference. So I never ever do this. I avoid it like death. And I just use polarity invert at the max. So that is one other phase technique you could use if you wanted to. If you can make it, if it works for you. Again, personally for me, it doesn't work. That's all. Um, the other, I mean, no, apart from the character, yes, I don't. The character is one thing. The other thing is you have all the low frequencies hitting you at the same time, so you lose a lot more headroom, and you don't get a lot of volume. So what that means is, um, now I've got the attack of the snare here in the close mic, and then I've got it coming in a bit later at the in the overheads, right? So I have a lot more headroom in this section because this isn't adding to that, right? So I have a couple more dB of headroom to play with the song overall because I haven't aligned these. And this is just one hit. This adds up over the course of the song, right? So my whole mix will have to be a little bit quieter or a little bit more compressed just because I've done this kind of alignment. So that is also one reason I don't do time alignment. And honestly, I have not seen a lot of people who do. I've seen very few engineers who do, but I've never seen any major mix engineers do time alignment. Honestly, I've never ever seen that happen. And this is not just a digital thing. You can do it in the analog world as well. But in that case, you don't delay things forward, you delay things back. So you delay the snare back to meet the overheads, because obviously you can't bring things into the future. You can only delay things. You only have delays in the real world, because things have not happened yet. If that's making any sense. But anyway, that's our overheads and drums taken care of. Let's listen to all of these together. Okay? And I'm going to all at once invert the polarity on all the overheads. See how hollow and sort of empty it sounds in the mid-range? Let's go back to that loop. I'm just going to keep doing this until you tell me what you hear. I just want to know, well, obviously you can hear the difference when I'm inverting the phase and not inverting the phase on these overhead mics. That's all. I just wanted to tell me if you can hear the difference. That's all. Yeah? Okay. So I'm also using all the overhead mics right now, which we are not going to be doing because we haven't tested to see if there's any cancellation what kind of effects we're having in between these mics. But owing that they're all in phase with the snare, they're all going to be pretty much in phase with each other snare wise, but we don't want to like create any weird problems with other drums because we haven't checked the toms yet and all that. So probably going to use just one or two of these at the max. So let's just start checking these. Yeah, that works. I mean, it's obviously going to work, but we want to see how much of a difference there is. It's pretty massive. It's pretty cool. So it looks like they're all relatively the same distance from the snare, which is why they're all kind of in phase. And you can also confirm that by looking at the waveform. So you can look at the waveform and you can see that all the overheads, these are the overheads, right? They're all starting at the same time, pretty much starting at the same time. That means they're all the same distance from the snare in the recording. Very, very, very well recorded drums. These are fantastically well recorded. So I'm going to take that down. So this is good. This means that we can kind of use any of these overheads. They all sound good. They all have different characters, or you can use a combination of them too. The last thing left to check is the toms to see if the toms are in phase with the overheads and what overheads they're in phase with, what overheads they're not. And in this case, you may want to invert just the close mics because we've already got the overheads to be in phase. In case we find that a tom is out of phase with one of the overheads, then we'd probably want to invert the tom mic because then we'd have to reverse polarity on the overheads and then invert the snare and do all that jazz. We don't want to do that. This is kind of fixed. At this point, if we find any phase inconsistencies, we're going to mess around with the closed mics and not mess with anything else. Sounds fine to me. Also sounds fine to me. And you can do the same test for the other overheads as well, but since these anyway are in phase, since all of these are pretty much in phase and they're the same distance, but that we've already identified, they're all the same distance from the snare. 99%, if the toms are in phase with one of the overheads, they're kind of going to be in phase with the others as well. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. But if you want to go ahead and test it, you can. So that's it. My drums are all done in terms of me prepping and testing and seeing what works and what doesn't work and all that stuff. Now, all that's left is to get a nice mix balance, okay? And this you can do with the rest of the mix running, or you can do it just with the drums. You can do it however you want. Since we're only working on drums today, I'm just going to go ahead and try and get this to balance out. First, I'm going to pick, and again, this you can do this however you want. There are no rules for how you do this. I'm going to do this as per what works for me in terms of my tastes. I like these XY overhead mics, but I also kind of like the copper heads. I'll just keep this loop going. Yeah, so I really like these, so I'm just going to use these, and then I'm going to build the rest of the drum kit around that. So I have a nice heavy snare in that mic. It's pretty loud, so I'm probably not going to want to use too much of the close mics in this. I'm just going to bring the kick drum in because there's hardly any kick drum here. I'm going to start with the out mic what I'm calling the out mic. That's nice. Bring some of that in. That's also really nice. Maybe too much. That's great. And I'm getting a lot of the snare top in the overhead, so I'm going to bring in some of the bottom to compensate for that. Right? And we're already at a point where I don't even need the top mic of the snare. Right? So I'm just going to bring in a little bit just to make it a little bit fatter. Yeah, that's nice and fat. I like that. And let's see what the ride does. Somewhere around there is good. And let's bring in that room. Room is also making the ride really loud. So I don't want that. Just a little bit. And maybe I'll compress it later so that I can just make this more prominent at this level. Okay. And let's bring in the toms. There are no toms playing here, but like I said earlier, bleed helps, right? So let's see what this bleed is going to do for this mix. It's making the ride a bit too shiny again. So I'm just going to leave it somewhere around here. Bring the hi-hats in as well. Again, there's no hi-hat playing here, but I want to hear what the bleed does. It's actually making the snare sound a bit more airy as well. I like that. Great. Fantastic. So there you go. You have a drum mix to start working with, and you can continue messing with this if you want. In fact, the kick drums, no, that's fine too. Yeah, and at this point you can start working on this on this mix if you want, or just put in things that you might want to use on it later, maybe like EQs or whatever. But I'm very, very happy with where this is right now. At this point, you can go ahead and you can translate all these movements to the trim plugins, but usually I leave that for much later in my mix. At a point where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to really touch this anymore, and we're kind of good to go. Right? And also, since my overheads are kind of at unity, I can also demo other overheads and see what they do to the mix, drum mix. That's pretty cool. That's also pretty cool. I really like these. These copperheads sound really nice. Maybe a combination of these two would be cool. Yeah, that sounds nice actually. Might use more of that to make it nice and wide, and a little bit of the XY in between, just to give it some, just to give it a bit of punch in the middle region, because these are much narrower than those. Yeah, I like that. There we go. Nothing. No EQ. No nothing. Just all we've done today is listen to our drums, identify things that we like, things that we don't like, things that we know are going to work, things that we know are not going to work. Just spend time getting to know these drums, right? And know how they were recorded and all that. All I've done is press one button, which is the polarity button, and moved some faders. That's it. And we've gone from, let's say I do this same thing in a separate instance, right? Let's just say I have all these just faders up, whatever. The same mics. But I've not done any of the polarity inversion or adjusting. We'll just listen to that. Right? So we've gone from a kit that's not balanced, where the ride is like totally in your face, and we have like some phase cancellation happening where the snare is kind of like being eaten up, to a place where we've got total phase coherence between all the mics, and we've got a balance where everything is nice and working. Nothing's too in your face, nothing's annoying you, nothing's jumping out at you too much. There's tons of glue, and there's also room now to start adding your bass and your guitars and all that stuff, as opposed to this, which kind of sounds like a or a ride recording with some drums underneath. And that's probably mainly because of this room mic, uh, and maybe the ride mic as well over there, right? So again, they both work, but now you're working with information, you're working with an idea of where everything is, where everything sits, and you know exactly what's in phase with what and what's out of phase with what. That information is very, very handy down the line. And you have a solid approach for what to do, and what's going to do what in your mix. So once you start, let's say you add bass guitar to this, and the bass guitar is just kind of walking over the kick drum, you know that this first mic, has all the top end from the beater coming into it, right? It's got a lot of top end. So you can just turn that up and you're going to get top end from that mic. Now, if you were walking into this mix without that information, you would not know the quickest, simplest approach to improve the attack of the kick drum. You might use an EQ, you might use parallel compression, you might use distortion, all unnecessary things at that stage. But the fact that you've spent time with the mix, you've spent time with the recording, you're aware of what's happening and what's adding what, and you've played with everything, you've worked with different versions of this mix, you know all you need to do is turn this fader up and you're going to get more attack on that kick drum. Take it down and that's gone. I want more attack on the kick drum. Cool, turn up the attack fader. That's it. That's all you need to do. You want to make that a little bit brighter, you EQ only that mic and make it brighter. That's it. Okay. Oh, I want more ride. Okay, you've got a ride mic. You can just mess with that. You know that the bleed in that mic is not offensive at all. So you can just turn that up and mess with that. It's too bright for you, no problem. Take the ride down. And also, if you're listening on your AK Audio Technicas, all the high-end hi-hats, cymbals, ride is going to be really, really bright, because the Audio Technicas have a 12K boost that look like this, right? So the Audio Technica headphones have this boost built into them over there. So if you hear any brightness or any issues here, just ignore them. I know it's not easy, but that's one thing I hate about those headphones, is it has this weird boost over there. Just that, which is why, again, I'm like, dude, use your speakers, because your headphones are gonna lie to you at some point about something. There's only so much a pair of $200 headphones are gonna do for you. So use different environments to listen to stuff on. I'm currently listening to this on my DT880s, because that's what I was using before class. And and the top end is much more balanced on these. And usually when I play this back on speakers, I know that this ride is going to sit where it is. Yeah, and at this point also mess with the mix a bit. You got it to a point where you like, but start messing with it. Just take things up, take things down, have fun with it. See what that does to things. That's pretty cool also. So you can get different drum sounds just by messing with the faders. I don't think it says that in the manual. But I used I used a software to analyze it ages ago. It was a proper RT analysis I did of the headphones, and it turned out that all Audio Technica, the MX40s or 50s, whatever we're using, they all have that bump at 12K. There's a software you can use to sort of negate that. It has a profile designed for different headphones where you can invert the EQ curve and sort of work against it. It's pretty good actually. It's a really nice piece of software. I forgot what it's called, but it's paid. You have to buy it. Uh, but ideally, I say don't rely on things like that because tomorrow you might not have it. You might be in a different place and you might not have it, and then you won't know what to do. So just learn to use different speakers. That's the best, easiest approach. Let's see. Audio Technica MX40 frequency response. Yeah. So this is the frequency response official. I don't know if this is official. I think somebody else may have done this. Don't take me to Reddit, dude. Just give me the image. Yeah, and as you can see, right around here, around the 10 to 12K mark, you have this big bump, and then above that. So I'm guessing this is around 16K, and then around between 10 and 12, you have these big bumps in frequency response. This is also exactly what I saw on that. You do get EQ curves that fix all this stuff, but again, like I said, it's up to you. You want to do that, you want to make that investment. I would recommend just kind of knowing that it's there and ignoring it and listening to it on a speaker. Like if you have a doubt, like, oh, that ride is too bright or this is too bright, blah blah blah, just listen to it on your speakers and they will tell you, and you'll know the truth. And the more systems you have, the better. More headphones, more systems, more speakers, whatever it is. Even if it's like a creative 2.1 speaker system, it's good to just have it there to test stuff. um Okay, that's all for today's class. I have linked you to the project. I want you to go through this exact same procedure that I've gone through. Set up the mix however you want to set it up. There is no wrong way to set up this mix. Whatever works for you, and then we will take it from there, and we'll look at the next steps for this, which will be mixing this within the context of the rest of the song, which is also very important. Or if you'd like, we can just explore drum mixing techniques without the context of the song. That way we can explore like whatever technique you want, and just do a lot of really interesting and funky things with drum mixing that have no relevance to the song whatsoever, but are techniques you can use later. So you let me know what you want to do with that, and I do owe you another class anyway, so I'll probably record the next class for you, and I'll send that to you tomorrow. You can watch that whenever you want, but let me know what you want. Do you want me to do it in the context of the mix or out of context? Either is fine with me.